Who do you think you can always count on? Your friends? Your coworkers? No, the ones we expect to stand by us no matter what are our own family. But what happens when the people who are supposed to lift you up are the very ones who push you down? When the sibling who was handed everything comes back, not out of love, but out of desperation. Welcome to AGS Stories, where real stories of betrayal, resilience, and triumph come to life. Don't forget to subscribe and join us as we dive into today's unforgettable journey. Growing up, my parents made one thing very clear. My brother was the golden child. He got everything: money, opportunities, unconditional support. And me? I was on my own. But guess what? Fast forward a decade, and now he's broke. And I'm a millionaire. It's strange how life works sometimes. As a kid, I used to sit at the dinner table and watch my parents dote on Ryan as if he were the center of their universe. They bragged about his achievements, celebrated every little milestone, and made sure he had everything he could ever want. Meanwhile, I was expected to take care of myself. I learned early on that in my family, there were two sets of rules, one for Ryan and one for me. If he needed something, it was given to him without question. If I needed something, I had to figure out a way to get it on my own. I remember the day Ryan got his first car. He had just turned 16, and my parents surprised him with a brand new sedan, wrapped up with a big red bow in the driveway. He hadn't even asked for it. My father handed him the keys with a proud smile and told him that this was the first of many rewards for all his hard work. I sat there in stunned silence. When I finally gathered the courage to ask if I would get a car when I turned 16, my mother laughed and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, sweetheart, you're smart. You'll figure something out." That was the moment I understood my place in the family. Ryan was the golden boy, and I was just expected to make do. It wasn't that they actively hated me. I was just an afterthought. If I wanted something, I had to earn it. If I struggled, it was my responsibility to push through. Meanwhile, Ryan coasted through life, cushioned by their love and financial support. When college came around, my parents wrote a check for Ryan's tuition without blinking. He got to attend a top-tier school, live in a nice apartment, and focus on his studies without a single worry about money. Me? I had to fight for scholarships, work multiple part-time jobs, and take out loans just to afford my textbooks. I remember calling my mom one night, exhausted and on the verge of tears after a long shift at work, and asking if they could help me with rent for just 1 month. She sighed and told me they just didn't have the extra money. Ryan's expenses were adding up, and they needed to make sure he was taken care of. That was another lesson for me. No one was coming to save me. If I wanted a future, I had to build it myself. So that's exactly what I did. While Ryan spent his college years partying and living off our parents' money, I was grinding. I studied hard, took on side gigs, and started learning about personal finance. I read every book I could get my hands on about investing, saving, and making money work for me. I didn't want to just survive, I wanted to thrive. Every extra dollar I made, I put away. While Ryan was blowing through money without a second thought, I was building something for myself. And then life flipped the script. Ryan never learned responsibility. He had no idea how to manage money because he had never needed to. He thought the money would always be there. But after years of reckless spending, bad investments, and living beyond his means, he found himself drowning in debt. And my parents? They had spent so much bailing him out over the years that they had nothing left. Their golden child had failed them, and now they were out of options. One evening, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant. "Grain, sweetheart," she began, dragging out the words in that way she always did when she wanted something. "Your brother is in a bit of trouble, and we know you're doing well now. We were wondering if you could help him out." For a second, I thought I misheard her. Help him out? After everything? After all the years of being ignored, of being told to figure things out on my own while he was handed everything? Now, suddenly, they needed me? I almost laughed. They had spent my entire life making sure Ryan had everything he could ever need, and now, after he had squandered it all, they wanted me to fix it. They thought I would fail without their help. They thought Ryan would always be on top. But life doesn't always work the way you expect. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in my life, I realized that I had all the power. The girl who had to fight for scraps, the girl they had overlooked and underestimated, had won. and they had lost. And at that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to say. I sat there with my phone in my hand, my mother's voice still lingering in the air. It was almost surreal. The very people who had spent my entire life telling me to figure things out were now coming to me for help. For a moment, I considered hanging up, pretending I never got the call, ignoring them the way they had ignored me. But then curiosity got the better of me. How bad could it be? So I asked what happened. There was a pause, long enough for me to hear my mother take a deep breath on the other end. It's Ryan. He's lost everything. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Of course, he has. It was inevitable. I had seen it coming for years, even if my parents had been too blind to notice. Still, I let her talk. He made some bad investments, she admitted. And the credit card bills, well, we had to step in to help. But now things have gotten worse. He's in serious debt, and the bank is going after him. I raised an eyebrow, and my mother hesitated, and we were hoping you could help. There it was, the moment I had been waiting for my entire life. The moment they realized they needed me. But before I answered, before I let myself feel the satisfaction creeping in, I thought back to all the times I had needed them. When I was 17, I worked part-time at a diner after school. It was a dingy little place, the kind where the floors were perpetually sticky and the scent of burnt coffee lingered in the air. I would rush there straight from my last class, still wearing my school uniform, and work until closing. One night, I was wiping down the tables when I heard a familiar laugh. I turned, and there was Ryan, surrounded by his friends, throwing back milkshakes like they were cocktails, laughing without a care in the world. I didn't want him to see me. I ducked behind the counter, hoping to go unnoticed, but luck had never been on my side. "Hey, isn't that your sister?" one of his friends asked, pointing in my direction. Ryan's gaze followed, and when his eyes landed on me, I saw something that made my stomach twist: embarrassment. He smirked, shaking his head. "Yeah, she works here. Gotta pay her own way, I guess." His friends laughed. My face burned. I wanted to disappear. That night, when I got home, I told my parents what had happened. I told them how humiliated I had felt, how exhausting it was trying to keep up with school and work. "I just need some help," I had said, my voice small. "Maybe just a little money for books so I can cut back on hours." My father sighed, setting down his newspaper. "Grain, we can't just hand out money whenever you need it. You're independent, right? You'll figure it out." I glanced at Ryan, who was lounging on the couch, his feet propped up on the coffee table, scrolling through his brand new phone. The same one my parents had bought him just a week ago. That was the moment I knew I was truly on my own. Back in the present, I clenched my jaw as my mother's voice droned on. "We just need a little help, sweetheart," she pleaded. "You're doing so well now. You've always been the responsible one. And Ryan, well, he's just going through a rough patch." A rough patch. That was one way to put it. Ryan had spent his entire life coasting by on their money. He had partied his way through college, dropped out of law school because it wasn't fun, and then hopped from one failed business venture to another. I, on the other hand, had clawed my way up from nothing. I had worked multiple jobs, survived on instant noodles, and studied in dimly lit libraries while my friends went out drinking. I had poured every spare penny into savings and investments, determined never to be at anyone's mercy again. And now, after years of telling me I was on my own, my parents had the audacity to call me up and ask me to save him. I let out a bitter laugh. "So let me get this straight. You bailed him out, drained your savings, and now you want me to clean up the mess?" My mother's tone turned sharp. "He's your brother, Grain. Family helps family. Family helps Ryan," I corrected. "Family left me to fend for myself." "That's not fair," she said. "We did what we thought was best." "No," I snapped. "You did what was best for him. And now he's a 32-year-old man who doesn't know how to take care of himself because you never made him." There was silence on the other end. Then a sigh. "We just don't know what to do. We're getting older, and we can't keep bailing him out." I closed my eyes, shaking my head. It was exactly what I had been waiting for. The moment they realized they had made a mistake. And yet I felt no satisfaction, no joy, just exhaustion. "Please," my mother whispered, "just help us this once." I exhaled, long and slow. Then I made my decision. "No, She gasped. Grain. No, I repeated, firmer this time. You made your choice a long time ago. Now I'm making mine. Her voice wavered. But he's your brother. No, Mom. He's your son. And he's your problem. Then, without another word, I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hands, waiting for the guilt to come. But it never did. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. And then the real fallout began. Ryan started calling, then texting. First, he was apologetic, playing the role of the poor brother who had made a few mistakes. Then, when I didn't respond, the messages turned angry. You think you're better than me now? He wrote. You wouldn't have made it without us. I laughed at that. Without them? I had made it despite them. The final straw came a week later when my parents left a voicemail. We didn't want it to come to this, but if you don't help, we'll have no choice but to sell the house, my mother said, her voice trembling. Please, Grain, don't do this to us. I didn't respond, because for once, I wasn't the one doing something to them. They had done it to themselves, and I wasn't going to be their safety net. Not anymore. Then came the day that changed everything, when my parents called me, desperate for help. But by then, it was already too late. The phone calls didn't stop. First, they came from my mother, her voice drenched in the same sugary guilt she had used my entire life. Honey, we know we weren't perfect, but we're still your family. You're doing so well now. Can't you help us just this once? Then my father, more direct, more firm. We raised you, Grain. We gave you a roof over your head, food on your plate. We weren't perfect, but no parents are. It's time you gave back. And of course, Ryan. His messages switched between desperation and resentment. One day, he was apologizing for the way he had treated me, begging me to reconsider. The next, he was lashing out, accusing me of being selfish, ungrateful, cruel. But I didn't answer. I refused to let them drag me back into their world, to make me feel like I owed them something just because they had given birth to me. For years, I had been nothing more than a shadow in my own family, a footnote in their lives while they spent all their love, attention, and money on Ryan. And now, after decades of telling me to fend for myself, they expected me to save them. I knew it wasn't over. My parents were too stubborn to give up that easily. And sure enough, one evening, they showed up at my door. I opened it to find my mother standing there, eyes red, clutching my father's arm. Ryan stood slightly behind them, looking haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. He had lost weight. His expensive clothes looked worn, his posture slouched in defeat. Grain, please, my mother whispered. Just hear us out. I could have shut the door right then. I could have walked away, let them deal with the consequences of their choices. But something in me, maybe the last remnants of the daughter who had once craved their love, needed to face them, to let them see what they had done. I stepped aside, letting them in. They settled onto my couch, my mother nervously wringing her hands, my father staring at me with a look I had never seen before. Was it regret? Shame? I couldn't tell. Ryan spoke first. I messed up, he admitted, voice hoarse. I spent too much. I trusted the wrong people. I didn't think things through. I know that, but I'm trying to fix it. I just need a little help getting back on my feet. I crossed my arms. And what, exactly, do you want from me? My mother sniffled. Anything you can give. A loan, maybe? Just to cover some of the debts. We'll pay you back. I swear. I laughed then. A sharp, bitter sound. Pay me back? With what money? No one answered. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. You want me to save Ryan, to bail him out the way you always have. But where was this concern when I was struggling? Where was this desperation when I was working 3 jobs just to afford food? Where was this panic when I had to take out loans because you refused to help me with tuition? My father sighed, rubbing his forehead. Grain, you were always the strong one. We knew you'd be fine. That was it, the final straw. I leaned forward, my voice shaking, but steady. No, you didn't know I'd be fine. You didn't care if I wasn't. You never checked, never asked, never wondered if I needed help. You didn't raise me to be independent. You abandoned me. And now that your golden boy has finally hit the ground, you want me to pick up the pieces? Ryan's head dropped, shame washing over his features. For the first time in his life, He looked like he truly understood the weight of his privilege. But it was too late. You always thought I needed you. I continued, voice thick with emotion. You thought I would fail without your support. You were waiting for me to come crawling back, to admit I needed you. But I didn't. I built a life without you. And now you want a piece of it? No. My mother gasped softly, her hands flying to her mouth. Family helps each other. My father tried, voice quieter now, almost pleading. I shook my head. No. You help Ryan. You always have. But you never helped me. And I am not your safety net. I am not your backup plan. I am not the daughter you ignored until you needed something from her. Ryan finally lifted his head, his eyes glassy. I never meant to. But you did. I cut in. You all did. And you can live with the consequences of that. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Then my father stood. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Not in understanding, not in acceptance, but in finality. Let's go, he said to my mother. Tears streamed down her face as she hesitated. Grain, please don't do this. But I'd already done it. Years ago, when they chose Ryan over and over again, I had already walked away. They were just now realizing it. They left, Ryan trailing behind them, defeated. As the door shut behind them, I let out a shaky breath, my entire body trembling. For years, they had treated me like I was nothing. Now, suddenly I mattered, but only because they needed me. But I wasn't their safety net, and I never would be. The silence that followed their departure was heavier than I expected. I had spent years preparing for that moment, imagining how it would feel to finally stand up for myself, to finally make them see the truth. And yet, as I stood there in my quiet home, I wasn't sure if I felt victorious or just empty. I walked over to the window and watched as they got into their car. My mother wiped her eyes. My father kept his gaze ahead, his posture stiff. And Ryan, he just sat there, staring at the dashboard, the weight of reality settling on his shoulders for the first time in his life. They drove off without another word. No dramatic last-minute pleas, no empty promises of change. Just silence. And that was the last time I saw them for a long, long time. I heard through distant relatives that Ryan had to get a job. For the first time in his life, he couldn't rely on my parents' money to save him. He struggled at first. He wasn't used to working, to being held accountable, to actually earning what he spent. He hopped from one low-paying job to another, never lasting long. Employers didn't care that he had grown up with everything handed to him. They only cared about results. And Ryan had never learned how to deliver results. The safety net he had always depended on was gone. And for the first time, he had to survive on his own. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some sense of satisfaction when I first heard about his struggles. There was a part of me, buried deep down, that wanted him to suffer the way I had suffered. I wanted him to feel the exhaustion of juggling work and bills, the anxiety of not knowing how he'd make it through the next month. But then I realized I didn't actually care. Ryan wasn't my problem. My parents were my problem. Their choices, their mistakes, their regret, it had nothing to do with me anymore. I wasn't responsible for fixing them. And that realization, that was my freedom. My parents tried reaching out in the months that followed. The first time was a long, apologetic email from my mother, saying how sorry they were, how they had made mistakes, how they wished they could go back and do things differently. I didn't respond. Then a voicemail from my father. I understand why you're upset, but this isn't how family should be. We should fix things. I didn't respond. And then there were messages from Ryan. Grain, I know I messed up. I know Mom and Dad did too. But we're still family. Doesn't that mean anything? I stared at that message for a long time. Once upon a time, I would have jumped at the opportunity to hear those words. I would have clung to them, convinced myself that this was what I had been waiting for my entire life, for them to finally admit their mistakes, to finally see me. But it was too late. They weren't reaching out because they wanted to fix things. They were reaching out because they had lost everything and they didn't know how to handle it. And I had already moved on. I built a life without them. I didn't just survive, I thrived. I expanded my business, traveled, met people who became like family to me. I surrounded myself with people who valued me, who didn't see me as second best, who didn't only come to me when they needed something. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I just didn't care anymore. There was no revenge, no need for them to suffer for me to feel complete. I didn't wish them harm, but I also didn't owe them anything. And that was the difference between me and them. They had spent their whole lives believing love was conditional. That worth was something to be given and taken away. That family only mattered when it was convenient. I had learned that real love isn't something you have to earn. It's given freely, and if I had to fight for theirs, then it wasn't worth having. Years passed. I never saw Ryan again. I don't know where he is now, or if he ever figured his life out. I don't know if my parents ever truly understood what they had done. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. It doesn't matter, because for the first time in my life, I was at peace. They gave him everything and left me with nothing. But in the end, I was the one who won. For a long time, I thought I needed their validation. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself enough, if I became successful enough, they would finally see me, finally love me the way they had always loved Ryan. But the truth is, some people will never see your worth until it benefits them. And by the time my parents and brother realized what they had lost, I no longer needed them to see me. That was the real victory. I know I'm not the only one who's been through something like this. Maybe you grew up in a family where one sibling was the favorite, while you were expected to be the responsible one. Maybe you worked twice as hard to get half as much. Maybe you spent years waiting for recognition that never came, only to watch as the people who ignored you suddenly needed you when their world fell apart. So now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been overlooked or underestimated by your family? How did you handle it? Did you fight for their attention? Or did you walk away and create your own success? If you had the chance to stand up for yourself, would you take it? Or have you already? I know that not everyone will agree with my decision. Some people will say, I should have helped them. That family is family no matter what. Others might say I was right to walk away, that I didn't owe them anything after the way they treated me. So let's talk about it. What would you have done? Drop a comment below and let's discuss. Because this isn't just my story. This is a story a lot of us know all too well. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the best success is proving them wrong, without saying a single word. If you've made it this far, thank you for being a part of this story. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more powerful, real-life stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world, and it helps bring more stories like this to life. Like, comment, and share your thoughts below. I read every single one. And remember, you are stronger than you think. Subscribe now and join our community, because your story matters too.